Good morning. As the rain started coming down on September 9th, excuse me, and the floodwaters started to rise, floodwaters that grew to biblical proportions on that Sunday morning, people started helping. People that weren't quite as affected by the flooding started reaching out. They started by helping neighbors. It was neighbors helping neighbors. But then it became strangers helping strangers. Some in this room were there, helping others that were less fortunate. Alec Gatto was diagnosed with transverse myelitis at 8 months of age. Most folks would consider Alec, paralyzed from the neck down, handicapped, but Alec doesn't think that way. He doesn't let anything get in his way, not even a wheelchair. There are people in this room that are paralyzed, and there are others, people that I would think of as God's angels, who help them every day live their lives with dignity and grace. When what began as a hot, windy Monday afternoon on March 6th turned into a devastating wildfire, folks on their path didn't turn and flee. They turned and desperately tried to save their livestock. They tried to save their homes and their property, and they did it in that order. In 7 tragic instances, however, there were lives lost. There were 3 lives lost here in Texas, near McLean, Texas. Sloan Everett, who was a member of the association and a father of a young family, along with Cody Crockett and his girlfriend, Sydney Wallace, perished as they were attempting to save livestock that were under their stewardship. Some in this room knew Cody, you knew Sloan, and you knew Sydney personally. Whether you did or not, it was a day of sadness, it was a day of grief, and it was a day of despair, because in this business, we're all one family. And when somebody loses one, we all lose one. But as Mark Gardner said, the tragedy of that day ultimately passed, and in its aftermath came hope and opportunity. Hope for a better tomorrow, an opportunity for a fresh start. Part of that hope came from many in this room. You sent money, you sent supplies, you sent livestock, and in some cases, like Donald Brown, you went and spent weeks hundreds of miles from home trying to help others. One last point I want to make about that situation, certainly not of their choosing, but Mark and the entire Gardner family became a symbol of the survivors of the wildfire in western Kansas. They did so with dignity, grace, and faith, God's faith, more concerned about their neighbors and their community than themselves. So to each of you who helped, whether it was with the flood, the wildfire, or most of all, if you simply are willing to offer help to somebody who's less fortunate than us, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for reminding all of us of humanity's best intentions and the image of God that we should all strive to see in each other. So good morning. Welcome to Texas. Welcome to the 2017 National Angus Convention. We're delighted you're here with us, and I can tell you it's great to be back home in Texas for a few days. We've got a great 3 days planned for you. We have some outstanding speakers, present company excluded, some terrific educational sessions, a huge trade show featuring great grand prizes, and tomorrow evening we're going to cap it all off being back in this room listening to the Grammy Award-winning group Asleep at the Wheel. So you're going to have a lot of fun over the next 3 days. I want to begin by thanking the Texas Angus Association for all of their enthusiasm, support, and work. Thank you to President Mike Feeney, and thank you, Texas, for everything you've done. I also want to take a moment to thank our host. Red Steagall's been a voice of support for our industry for over 4 decades. And while we're blessed that he's here with us today, more importantly than that, we're grateful for the way he's eloquently defended our way of life and the way he presents himself. So Mr. Steagall, thank you, sir. In our history, there have been 6 presidents that called Texas home. We're fortunate enough today that 2 of them are here with us. Miss Minnie Lou Bradley served in 2005. She was the first and to date only female president of the American Angus Association. Likewise, Steve Olson served in 2015. Steve's from Hereford, Texas, and I can tell you from Bernita and my perspective, both families are dear friends, the Bradleys, James Henderson, Steve and Ginger, and we're blessed they're in our lives. But if you would you give Minnie Lou and Steve a hand for their service as well? We have some special guests here today. I want to introduce them briefly before I get started. My counterpart and good friend, Rob Smith, who serves as the Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Angus Association, is here. Joining Rob is Ms. Kajal Devani and Ms. Carmen Koning. Alejandro Lopez, president of the Mexican Angus Association, along with Billy Estrada is here. Luis Corral from the Directive Board of the Uruguayan Angus Society has joined us as well. Thank you all for traveling so far to be here. As you saw earlier, Uruguay will be hosting the World Angus Secretariat in 2019. We hope that many of you will be able to join us in South America. Also, Ross Wilson, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Texas Cattle Feeders Association, is here, joining us from Amarillo today, so we're glad that you were able to join us as well, Ross. Finally, one of the great things about being back home and being back in Texas is you get to be around family. And Vanita and I are particularly proud and pleased that our two sons are here today. Lane, our eldest, is a content manager for ReactorNet, a software fulfillment firm in San Antonio. And our younger son, Ross, is a tax accountant for the large consulting and tax firm Deloitte in Houston. Gentlemen, would you rise to be recognized wherever you may be? All right. I did that for two reasons. First of all, I wanted to actually see that they're here and not in a deer blind on opening day of deer season. The other thing I've got to share with you, though, this is, and I was thinking of this as I was getting ready to come on stage. In 2012, Lane served as an intern for Pfizer Animal Health, where I worked at the time. And Lane, I worked for a great manager named Stefan Janicki. Stefan now is the director of marketing for Zoetis. But Stefan didn't think of interns as you typically think of interns, which means they do the stuff you don't want to do. He told Lane the first day, he said, you can have as much responsibility as you want. The more you learn, the better you'll be. So it's up to you what you do this summer. So Lane naively took him at his word at it. And Stefan then had to actually act on it, right? So next thing you know, Lane's traveling around the country, which interns never do, by the way. He's traveling with sales folks. He's doing surveys with customers. And the next thing I know is he's telling me, he goes, I'm going to your national sales meeting with you in Salt Lake City in June, which really surprised me because interns typically don't go to sales meetings. But he went nonetheless. I saw him there. And then fortunately for me, I was chosen to speak and address a group that day. I can tell you it wasn't a group this big, but it was a sizable group. And after I got done and there was a break, Stefan walked up with Lane and Stefan said, Alan, he did a great job. And he turned to Lane. He said, Lane, he says, you got to be so excited to hear your father and see your father speak like this and speak in public. And Lane says, well, he goes, I've actually seen him speak in public several times before. And that kind of surprised me because I didn't remember that. You'd think you'd remember that, right? And I said, you have? He says, sure. He goes, all those years you coached me in Little League. After the game, you'd always talk to us. And I say, it's a little different. He goes, no, not really. He goes, you're kind of saying the same things. And he shrugged and walked away. Stefan looked at me, he said, Alan, he put his hand on my shoulder, he said, don't feel bad. He goes, my sons don't respect me either. And he just walked off. It has been a great year for the association. And on Monday morning, during my CEO report, I'm going to share that with you. But this morning, I want to talk about what I spoke about last year, and I want to pick up where I left off. Last year here in Indianapolis, I talked about the history of this association. I talked about how over the course of time, there had been decisions made by boards that were decisions of vision and decisions of courage. And because of those decisions, they put us in the leadership position that we're in today. And we're blessed by that. And we're the envy of not only every other breed association in the world, probably a lot of companies as well, because we truly are in a leadership position. The problem with leadership, though, it comes with expectations. And it has a burden. And that burden is those expectations. That you have to evolve and grow, or you're going to take a step back. You can't be satisfied with the way things are. You can't embrace the status quo, because if you do, you'll lose your leadership position. And you'll lose it sooner rather than later. But that's why we created the long-range strategic plan, to serve as our guide to move forward. And so while the past serves as our foundation, the long-range strategic plan is our blueprint for the future. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. And I want to talk specifically about the plan. We're going to focus it on one area. But if you look at you'll notice I put up the five areas of focus of the long-range strategic plan, which is genetics, commercial programs, leadership, product, and then research. And this next slide is actually what we refer to as a Venn diagram. You're not familiar with that. It's just to map out where are the different strategies, if you will, on a graph, and then plot those out to see where they fall. Unfortunately for us, there's a lot of synergy. So while we have 21 strategies, we're still in a great position, because when we work on one, typically it'll have an impact and effect on another one. But this morning, I want to talk specifically about the feeder cap program. There's been a lot of talk out in the country about the feeder cap program. So what I want to do is I want to share with you what we're doing, how the program is going to be structured, how it will be implemented. But most of all, I want you to hear it from me and what we are going to do. I want to begin with sharing with you a meeting we had last January. Right after the convention last year, we got a call from a major cattle feeder. And they said, we heard you're going to do a feeder cap program. You need to come see us. We need to talk to you. So in mid-January, Dr. Stephen Miller, Director of Research for Angus Genetics, Johnette Gottsweiler, who heads up commercial programs at Angus Source, and Ryan Rupert, who's no longer with us, but headed up special projects rather. We all flew out to Amarillo, then we drove over to see this major cattle feeder. It was a great January day in Amarillo. Locals would call it breezy conditions with a bit of a gust. It was breezy conditions. If you haven't been to Amarillo in January, it's 40 miles an hour, gusts are 65. And of course, the meeting was in a metal building, so you could hear that dust just hitting the sides, right, as we're meeting. But they got to the point right away. They said, we need help buying feeder cattle. And they explained. They said, we buy feeder cattle based on the history we have with the entity. They didn't say rancher. They didn't say producer. History with the entity. If we don't have a history of the entity, they told us, we buy on a variety of factors. First is health, and after that, it just becomes a mix of things. It could be breed composition, it could be frame size, it could be color. At that point, we're kind of guessing. So we need your help. Now, this isn't some mom and pop feeding operation. This isn't somebody had 2 yards. They have yards that are in double digits. They have yards in multiple states. They feed 1 million cattle a year. They buy 20,000 a head a week, each week of the year. So the other thing they told us that was really important, they said, we're talking to you because you're the only organization big enough that has enough of a footprint in the industry to help us. Because we got to get 20,000 calves a week and we need to do a better job of buying them. So that's where we're going to begin with our journey as we talk about the feeder calf program. So like the other programs we have, we put together a task force to oversee this, and this was really some of the best of our best. It was headed up by Mark McCauley, Vice President of Production at Certified Angus Beef. On his team was Dr. Steve Miller, Director of Research at AGI, Dr. Justin Sexton, Director of Supply Development for CAB, Paul Dykstra, Beef Specialist with CAB, Johnette Gottsweiler, and then David Gazda, Director of Regional Managers. These are some of the best folks we've got and some of the most experienced in the cattle industry, and I would suggest you even might think of them as the dream team. Remember the dream team in the Olympics? This is our dream team, just not as tall, not as athletic, but very similar. So we went back and the team started looking at some of the research and so forth and talked to a lot of folks. And I want to start with some research we did last year for the commercial market. And one thing about research that's always interesting, really good research, is you find out things you don't necessarily believe, right? That maybe you had this self-truth in your mind, this is the way the market is, and then research tells you differently. So the first slide I put up here, no surprise here, folks think it's important that Angus calves are identified as Angus, right? Check, we all know that one. Right? The other thing we asked them was, what are factors when feeders buy cattle from you, what are they looking for? They're looking for health, first and foremost. They're looking at past feeding performance. They're looking at breed type. They're looking at carcass merit potential. But here's the one that kind of jumped out at us. We asked them, if the association had a feeder calf program, would you consider it extremely beneficial, or very beneficial, or not beneficial at all? 2/3 said very beneficial, and the real surprise was this. The area of the country that was most interested was the Southeast. The area that we all think those small operations can't put together enough feeder calves to make a difference, right? But they don't think so. They see a need. Obviously, our team talked to a lot of cow-calf producers. They told us 3 things. The program has to be simple to enroll, it's got to provide a value, and it's got to work for all herd size operations, not just the big guys. We also talked to the marketing channel, and we got input from key stakeholders. We had personal meetings, we had phone calls. You can see up here who some of the folks we talked to, and they told us three things as well. It must be simple and easy to understand, not just enroll, but to understand. It must fit with existing value-added programs, and this last part's really important. It has to fit the speed of commerce, 30 seconds or less. Finally, we talked to cattle feeders. Again, every major cattle feeder you see up here, we either had a meeting with or at least a couple of phone calls with, and they told us, they were very poignant in what they needed. They told us four things. First, that gain and trade are the most valuable traits by feeders. Second, the program must be simple and designed with the user in mind. So we got that pretty clear, right? It's got to be simple. Third is that feeders have a very limited knowledge of existing cattle feeder programs and even less of EPDs and dollar indexes. And finally, fourth, and this is really important because this is different than most feeder calf programs out there, a program must allow feeders to determine the dollar value. Now, if you're not familiar with the cattle feeding market, cattle feeders look at the market probably every 15 minutes, don't they, Ross Wilson? Sometimes more. They know what the price of cattle is. They don't trust outside organizations. Even someone as trusted as the American Angus Association tell them, here's how much money I'm going to make on a calf. Where they want our help is to tell them, what is the potential genetic value or potential of this calf? Excuse me. Not necessarily how much money can we make, because that's going to depend on the price they pay, obviously, right? So we gathered all that information together, and in June, the team came back and proposed the program structure to the board of directors. Okay, I'm going to share that with you right now. First, the program is going to be built around genetic index scores. There'll be 3 genetic indexes. One will be for average daily gain, one will be for quality grade, one will be for replacement, female replacements. Second, the higher the score, the better. Pretty simple. And finally, third, let's go back to what the marketing channel told us. We'll allow people to have the option to choose whether or not they can participate in an animal health program or a source verification program. I sorry, went out of order. We'll talk about the scores here in just a second. The industry average score will be 100. I'm going to explain to you what that means in just a second. So 4 points. The genetic index score, higher the score, the better. The score for each attribute is based on an industry average of 100, and qualifying health and PVP programs may be added. Okay, this is the industry average that we use. This is a composite that Dr. Miller put together, a composite average. You'll see it's made up of 70% Angus, 13% other British breeds, 13% Continental, and 4% Bos Indicus. So this will be what we compare to as the industry average cow. So I want to give you some examples of what the certificate may look like. This is, we're not that far along yet, so I'm going to just give you some examples, make it a little bit easier to see. But this is the certificate for the average daily gain. You can see the badges there, the optional programs. In this case, it's a health program, SelectVac. It has a GeneMax test on the herd, and then it's a source verified herd as well. And one thing I want to point out, these numbers are not for an individual animal, they're for the herd itself. And we'll talk more in just a moment about how that was determined. If you look at the quality grade score, you'll see a score 125. You see there's a CAB logo there, and I'll share with that a little bit more about that in a moment. But essentially, the quality grade score, if it scores 125 or higher, that animal, assuming the color fits the parameters, is eligible to qualify for CAB if the carcass grades out that way. Right? And then finally, the female replacement score. That index is based on calving traits, growth, cow feed requirements, and fertility. Okay, so just to summarize everything, you'll get, the program will give 3 scores: average daily gain, quality grade, and female replacements. Because we know not everybody sells all their females, right, as feeders. So it'll allow them to go ahead and market those females as female replacements. You may ask, well, how do these scores rank? Let me explain this table to you. You'll see the percentile ranks. That would be the rank of the bull, and if they bred that industry average cow. Okay? So if you look at the very top line there, that 1 percentile rank on quality, if it bred the industry average cow, the score will work out to 191, way above the 125. And if a bull in the top 50% is bred to those industry average cows, that score will be 125. And that's where you get the CAB logo. Now, if it's not the greatest performing bull, it's probably not going to have the greatest performing number on those calves as well, right? But that stands to reason. You see the average daily gain as well. The top 1% is a score of 156. And the bottom 5%, I'm sorry, is 93. So just to give you a very high-level view of how the program works. So how do you participate in the program? Who's eligible to participate? There's three requirements. Number one, the bull battery has to be 75% registered. And that's registered with a breed association, not registered with an individual ranch, with a minimum of 50% of those bulls being registered Angus bulls. Any unregistered bulls that are 25% or less, make up 25% or less of the bull battery, require a DNA profile on file. Okay. We're going to need to know the breed composition of the cow herd, and then the calves have to be predominantly black. So they can match up with the GLA standard for certified Angus beef eligibility. So you may be wondering, why are we offering a program for guys that are using non-registered bulls, or I'm sorry, non-Angus registered bulls? It's simple. We want to grow the use of registered Angus bulls. If we just go to guys that only use registered Angus bulls, those will be called our customers, and we kind of got those guys already, right? So we want to grow that. We want to expand it, but again, it'll be driven primarily by registered Angus bulls. So how big is it going to get? Is it going to be successful? We think it will be. In fact, if you can see these numbers, I realize in the back room it's hard to do, but 10 years from now, we think we're going to have 1,500,000 calves enrolled for that year alone. And you may be thinking, that's a lot of calves, and it is. But if you really think about the big picture by itself, it's really not. Because the cow herd over this 10-year period is going to average 32 million. And based on our calculations on folks who use registered bulls that would fit those qualification requirements, there's probably 15 million cows out there that fit it. So we're talking about, in 10 years, 10% of that cow herd that would qualify. That's not very much, and it's 5% of the total. And frankly, if we can't do better than that, with the strength we have in the marketplace, I'd be somewhat disappointed. But it's still a lot of calves, and it's significantly more than anything we've ever done before, or frankly, any other feeder calf program that's out there. So it's something that will benefit each of you in this room that's producing cattle, and ultimately benefit the association and the Angus brand as well. So I want to talk about, I've told you about the program, I've told you about the requirements to participate, but what I want to talk about now is what's the next step? How do we develop the program, right? And we had two choices. We could develop the program internally, which was our preference, or we could consider a strategic acquisition. And I want to talk just a moment about a strategic acquisition, because sometimes people get confused when you hear that phrase, and it's kind of a cool, hip marketing phrase, but it means two things. First of all, you want to buy an organization that creates synergies with your existing business. But more than anything else, you want to buy an organization that will give you a competitive advantage in the marketplace. And I've got an example to help me illustrate that. Now, I know you Texans are going, man, how did he score Dr. Pepper? Only one in the room, boys. Only one in the room. But I want to tell you a little bit about Dr. Pepper and about how strategic acquisition worked out. So if you haven't spent much time in Texas, we Texans, there are two types of soft drinks. There's Dr. Pepper, and there's Coke. But Coke doesn't really mean just Coke. Now, my friend James Burke is here somewhere in the room, and James will tell you, back in the days when you go to Whataburger and they'd actually serve you your drink, this is the way the order would go. They'd say, what do you want in your burger? You'd say, I want to have a #1 special. I want cheese on it. Add some jalapenos, because you can customize Whataburger. That's a great thing about Whataburger, by the way. Every order's different. They say, what do you want to drink? And you'd either say Dr. Pepper, or you'd say Coke. But if you said Coke, they just look at you. And they'd say, well, you want a Coke? You want a 7-Up? You want a Sprite? You want a root beer? What do you want? Because in Texas, we just drink Dr. Pepper, right? And you may think, so what? Well, that bothered those guys from Coke, because they're the largest soft drink bottler in the world. And they have the major market share in every state, but of course not in Texas. And that was important because there are a lot of soda drinkers in Texas. So Coca-Cola, being a brand leader they were, said, we're not going to be second. That's not good enough for us. We're going to create our own product. So I don't know how many of you remember this wonderful concoction, Mr. Pibb. Now, I'm sure it's just coincidence. It's the same color. Instead of Dr., it's Mr. They're already in second, right? They're kind of going backwards as it is. But it kind of tasted like Dr. Pepper. For those of you in here that are Texans that want to admit if you had one, it wasn't bad. It wasn't Dr. Pepper, but it wasn't bad. But Coke thought, you know what? We've got such a brand image. We'll put those big marketing dollars behind it. We'll just take the market share from them because we're Coca-Cola. We'll win. So they tried. They put a lot of brand dollars behind it. They marketed, promoted it. A few years ago, they've actually changed the name. It's not called Mr. Pibb anymore. It's something else Pibb. I can't remember. It's hard to find. But eventually, in 2010, Coca-Cola paid Dr. Pepper $715 million. A lot of money, right? Well, there's a lot of soda drinkers. But here's the thing that most people don't realize. Mr. Pibb was launched in 1973. It took them 4 decades before they finally threw in the towel. Right? So think what they could have bought it for back in 1973. I wasn't even in high school in 1973. I'm guessing a lot less than $715 million, probably less than $70 million, right? But eventually they bought it, and what was a strategic acquisition became a strategic advantage. Its population in Texas is growing at 13% a year, and it's grown 4 million since they bought it, right? It's a lot of Dr. Pepper drinkers. A lot of Dr. Pepper drinkers. So I share that with you to let you know that we were in the same position. Do we go ahead and build our own and try to force our way into the marketplace with the other feeder cab programs out there? Or do we go ahead and look at another company? Now, when I say build our own, it's a little bit more complicated than that. We've got a wonderful technology team. We call them information systems. Lou Ann Adams and that team are phenomenal. They simply, I've worked at a lot of companies, they're the best. But they've got a day job. We're tight on resources. So I mean we'd have to hire people. And we'd have to start from scratch building a feeder cap program. So 18 to 24 months from now, if we chose that path, we have to be able to start beta testing our feeder cap program. Probably up to 36 months before it's actually in the marketplace people can use. It's a long time. And by the way, even if we build it, there are no guarantees. There are no guarantees it's going to work. There are no guarantees that we can do it that quickly because, again, we have to get a lot of data from other breeds and so forth to calculate these genetic scores. So what we did was we considered multiple options. And we ultimately started looking at a company that owned Reputation feeder cattle. If you haven't heard of Reputation feeder cattle, it's probably not surprising. They're relatively new. They don't have much of a market share, right? They're owned by a company called Verified Beef. Verified Beef is owned by Verified Livestock, basically the same company. It's owned by a husband and wife team. The owner is Shirlene Watts. The chief executive officer is Tim Watts. Their company origin is an animal identification, traceability, and process verification business. Their expertise is in software development and data analysis. They took the platform of Verified Beef, which I believe is the most sophisticated out there from a feeder calf program. It took them 4 years to build with over $5 million in dedicated resources, right? But the thing that was really impressive about Verified Beef and Reputation feeder cattle was their technology platform, right? They're experts in data analysis, computer program development, and they know the cattle industry, right? What originated as an animal identification company, traceability and process verification business, has grown into this very sophisticated software program. The thing that's important to know about Verified Beef, though, is, and this is where we got interested in them, is their data analysis methodologies and computer modeling were all adaptable. In other words, it could be reconfigured to fit our needs because we weren't interested in a dollar value program like they were doing. But we could do it. If we got access to that technology, we could build our program in months rather than years. Literally months. And it would work. There was a guarantee it would work because we'd have to start from scratch. The other thing about Reputation feeder cattle that really intrigued us was a new prototype software they had developed called Reputation Herd Builder. it would work great with our cell catalogs. Let me explain to you how this works. If you think back to those index scores, let's say you've got a bull battery of 10. I've got to keep this fairly simple because I'm a Texan and we're not very good in math. Okay? Well, let's say you have a bull battery, 10 bulls. That herd score is 120. Your quality grade score is 120. You got 10 bulls. 5 of them are scoring 130. 5 of them are scoring 110 because this software allows you to see that the individual bull scores. So 130, 110 gets you to 120. Guess what? We got to get rid of those 110s, right? So what you can do is you'll go in there, a commercial producer could go in, identify in the software program where his scores wants to be, what he's trying to achieve, and then he'll search. And this is the cool part. It'll hook up with all the animals that are offered online, all the bulls that are offered online that fit those parameters. Now, if it's ours, it's only Angus bulls. It's not ours, it's anybody's bulls, right? But just think about the power that commercial producer has. All of a sudden, he can go in and look at those Angus bulls he's been looking for. He doesn't have to flip through pages and pages of cell catalogs trying to figure out what best fits his program. He'll get a list. And there won't be a list by the size of the operation. It won't be a list by who advertises most, but simply those lists that are on cell catalogs on our platform. Right? They'll be in alphabetical order. It's pretty powerful way for somebody to improve their genetics, isn't it? It's also a pretty powerful way for us to improve the genetics we offer as well. Because guess what? If you got a bunch of bulls that are scoring 105, you're selling them, I guess you're going to want to upgrade them a little bit, right? Stay in the marketplace. So it's what I would consider a win-win for both sides. So we did a lot of analysis. We looked at, should we move forward with an internal development or should we look forward in acquisition? When we looked at the internal development, we had to consider a number of things. We had to consider the personnel and development costs, and that's not cheap, and particularly over time. And we also had to look at, if we develop it internally, how many calves are we not going to enroll that we miss out on as we're in the process of enrolling internally? And one thing I'll tell you about verified beef as well, we weren't the only organization that was interested. And there were major organizations, partners of ours, that wanted to consider them as well because they see the value and the importance of feeder calf programs going forward. But we did a lot of economic modeling to see which made the most sense. And in every sense, every example that we ran, every model we ran, it made more sense to buy a company at a fair and equitable price than it did to try and develop our own. And that factored in a number of things. It factored in our delay into the marketplace. And even understanding that if we got in the marketplace late, we are the American Angus Association. We'd make a big splash. But it would be similar to me running a marathon against our new Chief Financial Officer, Kenny Miller. Kenny runs marathons every week. I don't run anymore except when something's chasing me or Vanita's mad, right? A marathon's 26 miles. If he gives me a 20-mile head start, I don't know if he can catch me. He might. But I'm 2/3 of the way there, right? So we had to look at that as well. So ultimately, a decision of this nature goes in front of the board. And there was a lot of discussion, there was a lot of debate, there was a lot of deliberation. But eventually, the decision was made to acquire the assets of verified beef. It wasn't an easy decision. It wasn't unanimous. But it was the right decision. It was the right decision because it's going to get us in the market sooner. It's going to get us unique technology that we haven't had. And it's going to allow us to really take our market share and drive it forward. Don Schiefelbein at a board meeting a year ago asked the board, what's more important? What's better? Having 70% of the genetics in the commercial market or having 70% of the cows being Angus cows? Simple answer, 70% of the cows. Because if 70% of the cows are Angus, I don't care how many other bulls they use, we're going to end up at an 85% market share, and that's really what we're trying to do. This will give us a competitive advantage. It'll increase the demand for Angus calves with registered Angus genetics. I do want to show you what we're buying from verified beef. This is actually the assets. It's really something that I'm quite pleased the way it worked out. We essentially bought the assets of an organization. We didn't buy any liabilities. We didn't take on any personnel. We get all their software. We get their algorithms. We get their existing verified beef processes and procedures. We get their customer lists. We get their trade secrets and know-how. We also get 5 USDA verification programs, including cattle care and handling. It's the only one that's been issued so far to date, which is going to get important as consumers continue to want to know, have a better understanding where their food comes from. We get, of course, their programs, and then we get 2 patents. One thing to keep in mind, when you saw up there it said reputation feeder cattle, we bought that program. It won't be in the marketplace anymore. But the program you see come this summer will be the program I showed you earlier. Now, there's been a lot of talk in the country about the price. I've heard a lot of numbers. It's kind of interesting. I'm not sure. Well, here at the hotel, when you checked in, if you check in online, they give you a choice. There's standard internet, and then there's high-speed internet, right? You got to pay for the high-speed. I can tell you that high speed isn't as fast as gossip runs across the country in this organization, right? And it goes both ways. It goes both ways. But I heard, I've heard numbers starting at 12 million, then it was 10 million, then it was 8 million, and then after we had the price negotiated, Tim Watts, the CEO of Verified Beef, called me. He said, hey, he said, word in Montana by your members is we sold you the company for $6 million. I go, yeah, I heard that too. He said, well, pay me $6 million. I said, no, that's not what I negotiated. He says, that doesn't matter. Your members think you paid $6 million. I want the $6 million. I said, it doesn't work that way, right? So I will tell you, I think we got a good value for the company, but it's not inexpensive. We paid slightly under $4 million for this company, and it's a lot of money, and it's something that the board and I and staff take very seriously. But I want you to take a step back for a moment. It's a lot of money. Unfortunately, we have the financial reserves where it doesn't put any kind of undue financial burden on the association. But take a step back and think about if this program is able to do what I think it'll do and what others think it'll do, and we can add 5% to the value of your bulls in 3 or 4 years, much less 10%. Would it be worth it? Merle Richardson, if I told you that, hey, for every bull that gets registered this year, just this year, I need 25 extra bucks. But in 3 years, I'm going to give you 10% more value for your bulls than today. Would you do it? Probably so. Pretty good return, right? And that's really what we're talking about. So I don't want to dismiss the amount of money that we spent on this. It's a lot. And it's something rather unique about the American Angus Association. What other breed association could go out and buy a technology company? Because that's what we did. We bought a technology company. So we're going to go down this path. We hope to have the program out this summer. I'm very excited about it. I think it's going to be very successsul. But I'm going to warn you I want to issue a couple of words of warning. This won't be easy. Building something great is never easy. Secondly, as we go down this journey, there are going to be a lot of surprises. And I'll look back to my friend and colleague, Dr. John Stick at Certified Angus Beef. CAB's been in business for 40 years now. But even this week, you find surprises as you go through business. So where we end up may not be exactly where we think it is today, but I think we're going to end up in a pretty good spot. So I do want to let you know that we're going to, obviously I'll be here all week. The board and staff are going to be in a room here at the convention this afternoon. If you have any questions, you want to come by and visit, we're not going to have a formal presentation. It'll be room 202. That'll be from 1:30 to 2:30 this afternoon. We're more than willing to visit with you about how we're going forward with this program and what it'll entail and answer any questions you may have. But I will close by saying this about the program. I'm very excited about it. I think it's a major milestone in the history of this association. I think we're going to look back in time and say, you know what, that board looked ahead and they took some risk and it was worth it. So I just wanted to update you with that. So I've got 2 other pieces of business we need to do right now. I'm going to kind of change direction on you. I've been talking about the future, and I want to talk about, just for a moment, the present. And then we're going to talk about the past, but I want to talk about the present for a moment. We have a young lady here today who is attending her first National Angus Convention, right? And you may say, big deal. Probably seen several new staff members around. And by the way, we have added some really talented staff folks here in the last several months to the association, and we're excited about that. But this young lady's kind of has a little bit different, I guess, background, if you will. She actually works for the information systems team. I told you earlier, she's a software engineer. And here's what's a little bit different about her. Even though this is her first Angus convention today is the 18,469th day she's worked for your association. Her name is Mark Driesman. She's been providing computer code for this organization for over 50 years now. And if you would, I'd like you to just take a moment to recognize Mark, because I think she's a wonderful person. She's beloved by all, and she truly is a lady of grace and dignity. Thank you. Thank you. She's a special lady, and it's, you know, Mark, I know you were scared. You're going to have to make a speech. You don't have to. I got it covered for you. If you would, we talked about the present. I want to go to the past for just a moment. If you would, turn your attention to the video monitors, please.